there's a quiet thought that comes, and it goes something like this. I think my useful years are behind me. You don't say it out loud, but you feel it, in small ways, all the time. The world seems to be moving faster than you now, and somewhere along the way, it stopped asking your opinion. The work you are known for has passed to younger hands. Your body doesn't do what it used to. You tire sooner. You ache in places you didn't used to have. And the people who needed you so desperately, the children, the ones you spent yourself raising, they're grown and gone and managing fine without you. So a question settles in, one you'd be embarrassed to admit. What am I even for now? Am I just here, taking up space, waiting? Has my season of being useful, of mattering, quietly ended while I wasn't looking? And it sneaks up on you, doesn't it? There's no single day it begins. It's a slow accumulation of small moments. The meeting you used to be invited to and now aren't. The task that used to be yours that someone quietly took over. The way a younger person gently finishes your sentence or speaks a little louder, as though you might not catch it. None of it is cruel. Most of it is even kind. But it adds up, drop by drop, into a quiet message you start to believe about yourself. That you are moving from the center of things toward the edge, and from the edge toward the door. And you wonder if anyone would really notice if you simply slipped out of it. And the world is no help at all, because the world measures worth by output, by what you produce, what you earn, who still needs you, how much you can still do. By that math, growing older looks like a slow subtraction, a long, sad winding down toward the moment you're no longer good for anything at all. And if you've started to do that math on yourself, I understand the heaviness of it. It is one of the loneliest feelings there is, to suspect you've become unnecessary. And I think it stings most for a woman who spent her whole life being needed. If you were the one who held the family together, who remembered everyone's birthdays and worries and medicines, who was the first call when anything went wrong, then the quiet that comes when the calls slow down isn't just lonely. It feels like a kind of unemployment of the heart. You were so fluent in being useful that you never had to ask whether you were valuable apart from it. And now, with less to do, the question arrives raw and unpracticed. If I'm not needed, am I still worth anything at all? Hold that question gently, because it is the real one underneath all of this, and the world has handed you a cruel answer to it. The world says your worth was always in your usefulness, so that when the usefulness fades, the worth must fade along with it. But that was never God's math. He did not love you because you were useful. He loved you because you are His. Your value was never a loan taken out against your output. It was settled long before you ever did a single useful thing. And it does not shrink by 1 ounce as your strength does. You are not worth less than you were. The truth is, you were never worth merely what you could do. I want to sit with you in that because I'm not going to hand you a cheerful little slogan about how age is just a number. But I do want to show you something. There's a line in one of the Psalms, a few lines actually, written specifically about people in the season you're in. And tucked inside it are 2 images, 2 trees, that the writer did not choose by accident. He picked them on purpose, out of all the trees he could have named. And once you see why, I think the whole question of what your later years are for is going to look completely different. Stay with me. I know how worn that ground can feel, how many times you have been handed a verse about aging and felt it slide right off. because it was being used to paper over a real loss. I am not going to do that. The loss is real. The body truly does change, and some doors really do close. But there is a difference between honestly facing what is behind you and quietly burying what is still in front of you. And I think you have been told there is nothing in front of you. The Psalm says otherwise. The words are in the 92nd Psalm, and the writer, talking about those who belong to God, says this: "The righteous shall flourish like the palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon." And then, a couple of lines later, the part I most want you to hear: "They shall still bring forth fruit in old age. They shall be fat and flourishing." Notice he doesn't tiptoe around the fact of old age the way our culture does. He doesn't promise you'll stay young or pretend the years aren't passing. He says the words right out loud, old age, and then, in the very same breath, attaches to them the language of flourishing. That pairing alone should stop you. In a world that treats old age and flourishing as opposites, as a contradiction in terms, the Psalm sets them side by side as the most natural thing in the world. For the one planted in God, these are not two different seasons. They are the same season. And that reframes the very thing you have been dreading. You have been bracing for a season of decline, a long downhill stretch to be endured. But the Psalm does not describe two seasons, a good one and then a sad one. It describes one continuous flourishing that simply keeps going, through the gray hair, through the slower step, through all of it. Your later years are not a different, lesser chapter tacked on to the end of the real story. In God's telling, they are the same story, still being written, still going somewhere. Now, slow down with me on those two trees, the palm and the cedar, because this is where it gets beautiful. A poet choosing an image of a flourishing life had every tree in creation to pick from. He could have named the fig, or the almond, or the grapevine, good trees, fruitful trees. But trees like those have a season, and then they go bare. The leaves yellow and drop. They stand there through the cold months looking, frankly, dead, stripped down to gray branches, waiting for a spring that hasn't come. If the writer had wanted to picture a life that has its season and then fades, he had plenty of trees to choose from. And that's the version of aging the world has handed you. The seasonal tree. Bud. Bloom. Bear. And then the long, bare winter. You had your spring, the world says. You had your summer of usefulness. And now comes the inevitable browning, the dropping of leaves, the standing there empty, waiting for the end. It's such a deeply assumed picture that you may never once have questioned it. You may simply have accepted that this is what the later years are, the fading part, the after. The slow winding down toward bare branches. And once a picture like that gets into you, it begins to shape how you actually live. If you believe you are in the fading part, you start to act faded, to pull back, to stop reaching, to stop expecting anything new of yourself or of God. The belief quietly becomes the thing, so it matters enormously which tree you think you are. One picture gently tells you to start shutting down. The other tells you there is still growing left to do. The Psalm is trying to hand you the second picture before the first one talks you into stopping while you are still alive. But he didn't choose any of those. He chose the palm and the cedar. And out of all the trees in that part of the world, those two are the ones that do not follow the pattern of decline. And he knew exactly what he was doing. The writer of this psalm was not a careless poet reaching for the first pretty image. He was someone who looked hard at the natural world and chose his pictures with precision. So, when he set out to describe the godly person growing old, and deliberately passed over every tree that fades to land on the two that don't, that was not an accident. That was a statement. He was telling you that the pattern you've assumed for your own later years, the pattern of inevitable decline, is simply not the pattern God has in mind for a life rooted in Him. And everything in that phrase depends on the roots. The psalm does not say every old person automatically flourishes. It says the ones planted in the house of the Lord do. The palm and the cedar do not stay green by trying harder. They stay green because of where they are planted and how deep they drink. And that is wonderfully good news for you, because it means the flourishing of your later years is not about summoning a strength you no longer have. It is about staying planted, staying near to God, drinking from Him, keeping your roots down in the only soil that never runs dry. You do not have to be strong. You have to stay planted. The tree does the rest. Think about the palm, and not just any palm, but the famous date palm of that land, the one that grew in the great groves around Jericho and the Dead Sea. The Romans wrote about it. The historian Pliny marveled at its sweet fruit. The first-century historian Josephus described those Judean palm groves as one of the wonders of the region. These were not ordinary trees in the ancient imagination. The dates of Judea were famous all across the Roman world, sweet as honey, prized, traded, written into the record by the great chroniclers of the age. So when a Hebrew poet reached for the palm to describe a flourishing life, his listeners did not picture something scrubby and small. They pictured the most celebrated, most enduring, most generously fruitful tree they knew of. That is the tree God lays down beside your name as you grow older. And here is the thing about a date palm. It does not have a brief, showy season and then quit. It is long-lived, faithful, and it keeps bearing fruit decade after decade after decade, deep into a great old age. And some of its sweetest fruit comes from its older years. Sit with that, because it quietly overturns everything. We assume a thing is most productive when it's young and strong, and that everything after the peak is a slow decline in value. But that is not how a date palm works at all. A young palm is still finding its feet. It is the mature tree, the one that has stood through decades of sun and storm and sent its roots down deep toward the hidden water that produces the heaviest, sweetest harvests. Its best years are not its early ones. Its best years come later. The very age you've been taught to see as decline, the tree experiences as the season of its richest fruit. It doesn't go bare in winter, either. It stays green straight through. While the other trees are standing there stripped and brown, the palm is still green, still standing tall, still bearing. And the cedar of Lebanon, the cedar is an evergreen. It does not drop its needles and go skeletal in the cold. It stays green all year, every year, for centuries. Some of those cedars lived 1,000 years and more, growing only more massive, more rooted, more immovable with age. Age did not diminish the cedar. Age was the whole point of the cedar. The older it got, the greater it became. Imagine being told that about yourself, that the passing of the years was not stealing from you, but building you, that you were never a thing slowly running down, but a thing slowly becoming more. We don't tend to think of people that way anymore, but the ancient world did, and so does the God who made you. To Him, the gray hair the world tells you to cover is not a flag of decline. It is the ring inside the cedar, the evidence of one more year of standing, one more year of depth, one more year of becoming the kind of immovable, sheltering presence that only time can make. Do you see what the writer has done? He has reached past every tree that fades and deliberately chosen the two that don't, the two that stay green, the two that grow more, not less, with the years, the two that keep bearing and keep standing long after everything around them has gone bare. And then he says, that is what the righteous are like as they grow old. Read that again and let it land on you personally. Because it is not a general statement about old people in the abstract. It is what God says about you, if you are His. Not what He wishes were true of you, not what might be true on your better days, what is true in His eyes. The woman you have become through all these years is not a fading fig tree in the bare months. She is a palm, still bearing, a cedar, still green, still standing, still rooted, still growing, at the very moment the world swears you should be winding down. If something in you needs to hear that today, would you let me know in the comments? You don't have to explain. Just write the word green as a way of agreeing with what God says is true of you. And if you'd like to keep walking through Scripture with me like this, one hidden word at a time, I'd be so glad if you'd subscribe. Now, let me give you the words underneath the English, because they make it even stronger. When the psalm says the righteous in old age are full of sap and green, those are two specific Hebrew words, and neither one means fading. The first, behind full of sap, is a word that means fat, rich, overflowing with life, the very opposite of dried up and withered. It's the picture of a tree so full of living sap that it's practically dripping with it. Not running low, running over. Let those two pictures sit side by side. The world's picture of you, running low, and God's picture of you, running over. One sees a reserve being slowly drained down toward empty. The other sees a tree so alive with sap that it can barely contain it. Both are looking at the very same gray-haired woman. They are simply not seeing the same thing, and only one of them is seeing the truth. And the second word, behind green, is the Hebrew word ra'anan. And ra'anan means fresh, luxuriant, vividly, vigorously green. It's the green of new growth, of a leaf that just unfurled, of something thriving. And here's the detail almost no one notices. It is the very same word used earlier in that same psalm to describe being freshly anointed, freshly poured out upon by God. So when the psalm reaches your old age and reaches for a word to describe you, it doesn't reach for faded or spent or finished. It reaches for the word that means freshly alive, new leaf green. The same freshness God pours out on a person in their prime. He's saying that's what's still true of you in your gray-haired years. Not winding down, still green. And isn't that the exact opposite of how you've been feeling about yourself? Somewhere along the way, you began to picture yourself in faded colors, beige, gray, the tones of something used up. And God reaches into the very psalm written about your season and chooses, of all the words available to Him, the one that means vivid, living, new growth green. He is not being polite. He is not flattering an old woman to make her feel better. He is telling you the truth about what He sees when He looks at you, and it does not match the dull picture you have been carrying of yourself. You have been seeing beige. He has been seeing green this whole time. And I want to give you one more thing, because it is almost too perfect. And it really happened. In recent years, archaeologists found some date seeds in the desert of Judea, at the ancient fortress of Masada, and in the caves near the Dead Sea. These seeds were about 2,000 years old. 2,000. They had been sitting, dry and dormant, since before the time of Jesus, long given up for dead, the kind of thing you'd sweep off a table without a second thought. And a scientist decided to try, against all expectation, to plant one. She soaked it, and put it in soil, and waited. And after a few weeks, that ancient, written off, 2,000-year-old seed sprouted. It grew into a living date palm. And a few years ago, one of those resurrected ancient palms bore fruit. Real, sweet dates. The first of its kind to grow in that land in many centuries. Scientists had assumed it was botanically impossible, that a seed that old simply could not still hold living things inside it. They were wrong. And I think that word, impossible, is exactly the word you have quietly attached to your own later years. Too late for purpose, too old for fruit. Impossible. The little seed from Masada would like a word with that, and so would the God who kept its life sealed and waiting for 2,000 years. Just to show what he can bring up out of something the whole world had long written off. A seed everyone would have called dead had been carrying life inside it the whole time, just waiting for the right hands to put it in the ground. I can't think of a better picture of what God is saying to you. The thing the world looked at and called finished was never finished at all. The life was still in there. It only needed the right soil. And the life was in there even while it looked completely dead. For 2,000 years, anyone who saw that little seed would have said there was nothing in it, nothing left, no point at all. They would have been wrong every single time. The whole while, sealed up inside that small dry thing, was everything needed to become a tall, fruit-bearing tree. Nothing had to be added to it. The life was already there, simply waiting. It only needed to be put somewhere it could grow. And I wonder if you have been looking at your own later years the way people looked at that seed, as something finished, with nothing left inside it. And I wonder if you have been just as wrong. So let's bring this home. To you. To that quiet thought that your useful years are behind you. Here is the lie you've been believing. You've believed that fruitfulness means the kind of output you had in your stronger years. The working, the building, the running, the doing, the being needed by everyone. And since you can't do all of that the way you once did, you've concluded that your fruitful years are over, and now you're just running out the clock. But look again at what the psalm actually promises. It does not say you'll be as physically strong at 80 as you were at 30. It is honest. The body does what the body does. What it says is that you will still bear fruit, and fruit is not the same thing as exertion. Fruit is what a life produces from the inside, and the kind of fruit a seasoned soul produces is often the richest of all. There is a reason we instinctively seek out an older, steadier person when our lives are falling apart. We are not looking for someone with more energy. We are looking for someone with more roots. Someone who has been through the storm we are in and is still standing, still kind, still sure of God. That steadiness is fruit. It took decades to grow, and it cannot be rushed or faked. And right now, there is almost certainly someone in your life who is quietly hungry for exactly the steadiness your years have grown in you. Think about the people who have most marked your own life, the ones whose words you still carry, whose faith steadied yours, whose prayers you suspect are part of why you're still standing. How many of them were the young and the busy and the impressive, and how many were older? A grandmother, a mentor, a quiet saint near the end of her road, who had time for you, and depth, and a peace that came from a long walk with God. The most nourishing fruit in your life very likely fell from old branches. That is not a coincidence. That is the design. And it is the very fruit you are now in a position to become for someone else. That may be the most beautiful turn in all of this. The fruit that once fed you from the old branches of the saints who went before you. You are now becoming that branch. The grandmother's prayers, the mentor's steadiness, the quiet faith that held you up when you were young. Someone, right now, needs exactly that from you. You are not standing at the end of the line of those who pass the faith along. You are the living link in it now. And a link near the end of a chain is not the least important one. It is the one holding on to everything that came before, so that none of it drops. Because what is the fruit of an old, deep-rooted tree? It's not frantic activity. It's sweetness, shelter, shade for people who are tired, seeds that fall and become other trees. The fruit God is talking about in your later years is the fruit only your years could grow. The wisdom you've earned the hard way. The prayers you now have the time to pray. The faith that has been tested and held. The steadiness that younger people don't have yet and quietly come to you to find. You may not be building what you once built, but you have become someone you couldn't have been at 30. And that someone has fruit to give that the world desperately needs and cannot get anywhere else. And don't miss why the psalm says the old tree keeps bearing. Read the next line. It bears fruit in old age. To declare that the Lord is upright. That's the reason. Your fruitfulness late in life isn't just for you. When a person keeps growing greener and more faithful and more full of life precisely as the world expects them to fade, that is a living sermon. It is a testimony nothing else can preach. The young can talk about trusting God, but an old woman, still green, still bearing, still full of sap when her strength is spent. She doesn't just talk about it. She is the proof. Your continued fruitfulness is one of the most powerful things you will ever say about God. And you say it simply by staying green. There is a kind of preaching that needs no pulpit and no words at all. When a younger person watches a woman lose her strength, her role, her relevance in the world's eyes, and watches her stay tender instead of bitter, hopeful instead of hollow, green instead of gray on the inside. They are watching something they cannot argue with. They can dismiss a sermon. They cannot dismiss a life. Your endurance is an argument for God that no one can refute, precisely because it isn't made of words. It is made of you, still standing, still bearing, when by every worldly measure you should have nothing left to give. And here is the quiet dignity in that, even for the hardest days, even for the day you truly cannot do much at all. Because this kind of fruit does not finally depend on strength, or health, or a sharp mind, or anything that can be taken from you. A woman too frail to leave her chair can still bear the fruit of patience, of trust, of a blessing whispered over the people who care for her. Your worth was never in your capacity, and your fruit is not finally in your hands. It is in your heart and in your God, and neither of those fails when the body does. There is no condition so reduced that he cannot still draw sweetness up out of it. That is a promise you can lean your whole weight on, both for yourself and for anyone you love whose body or mind is failing them. The sweetness God grows in a person is not finished when the strength is. He has always had a way of bringing the very richest fruit out of the most stripped down, unlikely branches. And he has not lost it now. And this is exactly why the Bible's most important moments are so often handed to the old. Think of Caleb, who at 85 stood up and said he was as ready as ever and asked God for a mountain to conquer. And got it. 85 years old, and instead of asking for a rocking chair, he asked for a mountain. The hardest piece of land left to take, full of the very giants that had frightened a whole younger generation away. He did not treat his age as a reason to step back. He saw it as the reason he was finally ready. Decades of following God had not used him up. They had prepared him. The hard, holy thing he was made for arrived when most men his age were long finished, and he met it standing up. Think of Anna, the old widow in the temple, well past 80, who had spent decades there in prayer when most of the world had long stopped noticing her. And it was she, in her old age, who was chosen to be among the very first to recognize the infant Messiah and to tell everyone who would listen. Her whole life had been narrowing, in the world's eyes, down to a forgotten old woman in a corner. And it turned out she had been ripening the entire time for the most important thing she would ever do, which came at the very end. Her best fruit came last, and she had no idea, through all those long, ordinary years, that she was being saved for that. From the outside, her life looked like a slow fading into irrelevance, a widow growing old in a corner of the temple, easy to overlook, easy to pity. But God was not letting those years go to waste. He was ripening her. Every quiet morning of prayer, every year the world forgot her a little more. She was being made ready for a moment of purpose so important that it would be written down and remembered for thousands of years. Your quiet years may be doing in you exactly what hers were doing in her. You do not always get to see what you are being ripened for. So what does this look like in an ordinary day? Here is the small, real thing, sometime soon. Instead of measuring yourself by what you can no longer do, ask a different question. What is one piece of fruit only I can offer today? It will be smaller and quieter than the things you used to do, and that's all right. Fruit usually is. It might be a phone call to someone who's lonely, a prayer, prayed with the kind of depth only your years could give it, a word of hard-won wisdom passed to someone younger who's frightened, a blessing spoken over a grandchild, a simple, steady witness of a faith that has lasted. Offer that one small fruit on purpose, and notice that you have not finished bearing at all. You have only changed what you bear. And there is a freedom in that you may not have felt in a long time. You are allowed to stop grieving the fruit you used to bear. You don't have to keep trying to be the woman you were at 40, exhausting yourself, chasing a kind of output that belonged to a different season. That season did its work. This one has its own work. And its fruit is real. And it counts more in some ways than what came before. You are not being asked to do more. You are being invited to bear differently. And more deeply, the fruit that only a long-rooted life could ever grow. And if you want something to hold on to, try this. Find something green and growing. A plant on the sill, a tree out the window, anything alive and fresh, and let it be your reminder. When the thought comes that you're past your usefulness, look at that green thing and say, quietly, "That is what he says I am, still green, still bearing, full of sap, even now." Let the living thing in front of you preach back to you the thing the psalm is trying to tell you. You might be surprised how much that small habit does. The lie that you're finished is loud, and it repeats itself, and you can't always argue it down with reasoning alone. But you can answer it with something real and green and alive sitting right in front of you. Something that is, itself, quietly doing the very thing the psalm describes. Still growing, still reaching toward the light, with no thought at all of being past its time. Let it be a small, daily sermon you can see with your own eyes. The world will keep telling you that you are fading. Let one green, living thing and one green, living verse keep telling you the truth. So let me leave you with this, and I'll keep it gentle. When God wanted to show you what your later years are for, He did not pick a tree that fades. He picked the palm and the cedar, the two that stay green, that grow greater with age, that keep bearing fruit long after everything around them has gone bare. And then He used a word for you, ra'anan, that means freshly, vividly, vigorously alive. Not spent, not finished, still green. Your useful years are not behind you. The form of your fruit has changed from doing to being, from strength to depth, from building to blessing. But the bearing has not stopped, and some of your sweetest fruit is still ahead. The way the date palm saves some of its sweetest for its oldest years. You may be nearer to your sweetest fruit than you have ever been in your life. Not further from it, nearer. The world looked at the seed and called it dead. The world was wrong. The life was in there the whole time. So was yours, and so it still is. You were never meant to spend these years just running out the clock. You were meant to stand like the cedar and bear like the palm, green and rooted and fruitful, declaring with your whole unfaded life that the one who planted you is good. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.